When three alien judges stand before you, capable of reading a lie from the slightest spasm of your diaphragm, a stupid human joke becomes a death sentence. But the human smuggler Nika had no idea that an ordinary kitchen spice canister, which slipped from her hands a second later, would turn the trial into a brutal fight for survival inside a suffocating asteroid. To save the alien locked in power restraints, she would have to openly rebel against her own crew and burn her bridges of retreat forever. But how do you prove the innocence of someone the entire station believes to be a ruthless saboteur, when the high-tech sensors are blind, and the air in the sealed compartment is rapidly bleeding into the void? The heavy, rhythmic hum of the drilling rigs vibrated up through the stone floor of the round tech bay, a persistent buzz against the soles of her boots. Nika stood in the center of the round technical zone, trying to breathe evenly. Here, 2 kilometers deep inside a hollowed-out industrial asteroid, every sound meant either work or impending disaster. Right now, the dense, low frequencies meant a muffled, unrelenting pressure. Before her stood 3 figures. The Aquatic Judges wore no luxurious robes and held no tablets with lengthy indictments in their webbed hands. A classic trial with papers and cross-examinations was alien to them. Their moist, dark silver skin constantly secreted a protective mucus, and the wide gill slits on their necks pulsed slowly, synchronizing with the currents of the artificial atmosphere. They were judging Valian. The accused hung limply in magnetic shackles against the opposite wall. The large amphibian was charged with sabotage on the mine's central trunk line. Nika had come here as the sole witness under protection, to pull him out of harm's way, but she quickly realized one terrifying thing. The judges were not listening to her words at all. "You're making a mistake," Nika raised her voice, trying to shout over the guttural roar of the turbines beneath the floor. "He couldn't have damaged the trunk line. We were working in the adjacent drift that shift. I saw him. He never touched the pressure blocks. He was cleaning filters." The Chief Justice tilted his massive head slightly. His black, pupilless eyes were not looking at Nika's face. He was watching her ribcage without pause. The aquatic aliens perceived spoken language as easily falsified noise. They read the real truth through micro-fluctuations of the diaphragm, pulse rhythm, and the frequency of inhalation and exhalation. To Nika, they were individuals with their own strict and incomprehensible logic. To them, Nika was just a noisy biological pump, its valves currently betraying a ragged, uncertain rhythm. Nika swallowed against her parched throat. The silence from the judges pressed harder than the mechanical howl of grinding stone beyond the walls. It felt as if the aliens could physically sense the blood pounding in her temples. The tension mounted, demanding some kind of release. To hide the treacherous tremor in her fingers, she dropped her right hand to her belt and felt for the thick work pouch with her tools. There, among the magnetic wrenches, electrical tape, and spare fuses, lay a small plastic container divided into sections. An ordinary set of kitchen spices: red pepper, dried garlic, coarse salt, a little ground coriander. A funny smuggler's habit of carrying a tiny piece of earthly comfort through cold space, where all standard food tasted like compressed cardboard. Nika simply stroked the ribbed lid with the pads of her fingers, using the gesture as a personal anchor. The container brought her back to reality, reminding her that beyond this deadlock, there were normal cargoes, honest contracts, and understandable rules of survival. But the silence of the judges dragged on. The elder took a slow, fluid step forward, like a deep-water predator, gauging the resistance of its prey. His gills flared wider, chemically analyzing the volume of carbon dioxide Nika exhaled. The pressure had reached that precise threshold where Nika's internal brakes always snapped. She had never been able to keep a neutral face under direct threat. Her defense mechanism had always been stupid bravado. "Listen, if you're going to stare at my chest that hard, you could at least buy me a drink first," she rasped, forcing out a crooked smirk. It was a nervous, utterly inappropriate joke, and it cost her the entire proceedings. In that same split second, her breathing rhythm stuttered sharply, her pulse predictably spiked from her own audacity. The clumsy attempt to fake calm triggered a microspasm in her diaphragm. To human ears, the phrase had sounded merely awkward. For the aquatic judges, this sudden physiological spike was a red alarm. The gills of all three aliens snapped shut with a distinct wet click. The Chief Justice let out a low, vibrating whistle. Their sensory apparatus instantly classified the arrhythmia as a proven lie, inevitably followed by physical aggression. The two judges at his sides reflexively thrust their hands forward, instinctively shielding themselves from the deceiver. "No, wait, you don't understand," Nika instinctively jerked back, raising her palms in a universal placating gesture. Her backward step was too hasty. Her elbow snagged hard on the open flap of her tool pouch. The spice canister slipped from its pocket, struck the metal floor grate, and cracked open with a dry crunch. A thick, acrid cloud of ground red pepper, garlic, and pollen billowed into the air. The smell was sharp, utterly alien to the sterile atmosphere of the deadlock. And it might have been fine if Nika hadn't stepped back right onto the life support system's floor vent. The powerful draw of the main line instantly pulled the colored cloud inside the grate. For one long, viscous second, nothing happened. Only Valian, in his magnetic shackles, twitched oddly, staring at the empty broken plastic by her boots. An unwelcome and extremely ill-timed question surfaced in Nika's mind. If Valian truly had been preparing a massive act of sabotage all these days, why had he secretly brought her small, technical parts for her shuttle, stolen from the warehouse? A real saboteur, destroying someone else's main line, wouldn't need human junk. He was clearly doing something else. The station cut off her thought. The background rumble of the ventilation faltered and sharply changed pitch. Somewhere below deck, an emergency valve clanged loudly. The highly sensitive climate control software, detecting a massive injection of caustic, unknown organic matter directly into the intake, instantly switched the sector into aggressive chemical scrub mode. The steady sound of circulation turned into a broken, strained howl of machinery. The air around them began to change rapidly. Moisture fled the compartment at a terrifying, unnatural speed. The automatics pulled water from the atmosphere, trying to bind and filter out the volatile contamination. The Chief Justice staggered. His smooth, silvery skin lost its sheen right before her eyes, turning dull and rough. He tried to take a deep breath, but the dry, freeze-dried air seared his sensitive lungs. The alien let out a muffled, gurgling cough and sank heavily onto one knee, clutching his throat with webbed hands. The two other judges also began to list sideways, their gills quivering convulsively, helplessly sticking together from the critical lack of moisture in the air. The station, strictly executing its cleaning protocol, was drying them out alive. Nika froze in the middle of the collapsing tribunal, feeling the unnaturally dry air pulling the skin tight on her own lips. Her stupid attempt to defuse the situation with a joke had just created a direct physical threat to the entire alien species on the station. The accident had only just begun. A sharp, whistling sound of air being sucked out of the compartment rapidly drowned out even the familiar deep hum of the drilling turbines. Nika took a single instinctive step forward. The sterile atmosphere of the round tech bay was turning into a frozen wasteland before her eyes, and the Chief Justice, wheezing hoarsely, sank heavily onto the metal floor grate. His gleaming, silver-tinged skin was rapidly losing moisture, visibly crusting over with a dry, whitish rime. "Hey, let me help. We need to get away from the vent," Nika's voice cracked, coming out much louder and sharper than she intended. Her throat had already begun to ache painfully from the catastrophically plummeting humidity. To her, it was a clumsy, purely human attempt to soothe a suffocating living being. But the biometric sensors of the aquatic aliens, calibrated over centuries for the most subtle analysis of physiological changes, registered this acoustic spike in an entirely different way. In their strict, rigorously defined worldview, a large object moving suddenly closer, accompanied by a spike in volume and an erratic diaphragm rhythm, could mean only one thing. The human, just caught in a lie, had shifted to outright physical dominance and was now preparing to deliver a decisive blow to the weakened victim. The two other aquatic judges, also mercilessly convulsing from the sudden dehydration, reflexively recoiled backward, breaking formation. They threw up their webbed hands, frantically covering the vulnerable, pulsating gills on their necks from the expected attack. The Chief Justice let out a muffled, wet click and tried to crawl away from Nika, his weakening fingers scraping against the corrugated metal of the deck. Their collective flood of stress hormones and the sharp, catastrophic drop in vital signs were instantly registered by the station's automated systems. The Roundtech Bay's security system did not analyze context or understand intent. It simply saw 3 high-priority biological objects whose metrics indicated critical panic and an imminent threat to life. Somewhere in the dark overhead structures, a mechanical siren wailed briefly. 4 massive steel plates, serving as the airtight doors of the technical compartment, slammed together with a deafening screech. Thick, locking bolts drove into deep sockets with a dry, heavy thud. The lighting flickered, cutting the cold white light and flooding the space with an emergency yellow spectrum. The Roundtech Bay had entered full quarantine mode. Nika lunged toward the exit, but the heavy industrial metal had already formed a monolithic wall, cutting off any path to the outside. From the opposite side of the compartment came a piercing metallic screech. Valian, who had been hanging limp in the force restraints, began to thrash violently against the wall. The large alien jerked his shackled shoulders, trying to break free. But he was not looking at the suffocating judges at all. He was desperately twisting his massive neck, staring directly at the exhaust vent running at full power, the one that had sucked in the red cloud of spice just seconds ago. He was opening his mouth wide, straining to produce any sound through the roar of the fans, and pulling his bound hands in the same direction, clearly trying to point at the very cause of the accident. Yet the security protocols of the Roundtech Bay remained unforgiving. To the primitive motion sensors, the accused's violent physical lunges meant only an attempt to exploit the chaos and stage a forceful uprising. The magnetic coils embedded in the stone wall hummed ominously, building power. The shackles mercilessly retracted, slamming Valian's broad spine into the hard rock with incredible force. The metal cuffs twisted roughly along their threads, critically tightening around his wrists and forearms. There was a sickening, wet crunch of compressing joints. Valian let out a low growl of searing pain, his large head dropping limply onto his chest. But he kept stubbornly rolling his eyes toward the accursed floor vent. Precisely at that moment, 3 small scanning modules slid out of hidden slots in the baseboard with a soft hiss. Strictly executing the protocol for chemical threat localization, they deployed a wide grid of greenish laser light over the floor. The beam crawled slowly and methodically across the metal grate, reading in detail the residual trace of scattered pepper, salt, and dried garlic. The green analytical beam swept over Nika's heavy boots, then jumped to the scattered tools that had clattered out of her unfastened work pouch. The laser passed indifferently over the wrenches, a roll of electrical tape, and the shattered plastic of the Spice Canister. Then the beam caught on several heavy, gleaming objects that had rolled right to the edge of the floor vent grate. 2 heavy titanium relays and a complex diagnostic shunt from a light shuttle's navigation panel. The very same shuttle parts that Valian, for some inexplicable reason, had been secretly bringing to Nika every shift before work began. The security scanner instantly shifted its color from green to a pulsing crimson. The local program had identified high-tech industrial components that, under no circumstances, should ever have been in the bag of a common line technician. A short, piercing system beep sounded, and 3 rotating holographic markers appeared, hanging clearly above the parts. The Chief Justice, bracing himself with immense effort on one trembling hand, lifted his heavy gaze toward the scanner-lit objects. His sensitive judge's gills had fused into a single inflamed line. The skin on his broad face was cracking dangerously, oozing thick ichor instead of life-saving water. But his trained mind, schooled in the impeccable logic of evidence, pieced the disparate facts together in a fraction of a second, forming an absolutely clear, irrefutable picture. First, this human had exhibited an anomalous physiological spike during testimony, proving a deliberate lie. Then, this same human had lunged forward, emitting an acoustic aggression signal, while dispersing an unknown caustic organic substance into the air, proving an act of assault. And finally, the technical scanner highlighted parts stolen from the warehouse right at her feet, providing a flawless motive and irrefutably proving her connection to the accused saboteur. In the dimming eyes of the suffocating judge, Nika was no longer just a loud and unpredictable witness under protection. She was now officially marked as the primary accomplice. The alien drew in a searingly dry, dead breath. overcoming the cutting pain in his scorched tissues, and with enormous effort, raised his hand. He pointed two folded fingers directly at the center of Nika's chest. A ragged, high-pitched whistle tore from his parched, spasm-constricted throat. This was not a cry for help, nor a moan of pain. It was an official legal marker of a confirmed threat, a direct command for the autonomous station systems. In that same instant, 4 armored hemispheres opened with a soft click beneath the stone ceiling. The internal perimeter defense turrets instantly snapped out of sleep mode. 4 thin red beams from the automatic targeting sights slid across the gray walls and converged synchronously on Nika's work jacket, freezing on the fabric just below her collarbones. The air in the sealed compartment became so freeze-dried that Nika physically felt the taut skin on her own lips cracking dryly. A distinct, salty taste of iron filled her mouth. Each new breath came with unimaginable effort, as if she were trying to force fine glass shards into her lungs. The climate control unit continued methodically extracting the last grams of moisture from the space, blindly executing its lethal purification task. Nika remained standing absolutely motionless, not daring even to raise her lowered hands, as the red laser dots quivered slightly in rhythm with her quickening pulse. The Roundtech bay was hermetically locked from the inside. Only a couple of minutes remained before critical dehydration, after which all 3 aquatic judges would inevitably turn into dead, desiccated husks. And the blind security system was ready to burn a hole straight through the human at the slightest careless movement. A sharp burst of static tore through the straining howl of the emergency ventilation. The sound came from the work communicator on Nika's belt, and in the sealed, freeze-dried deadlock, it rang out with unnatural loudness. 4 red laser dots twitched in unison on the fabric of her jacket, reacting to the sudden acoustic burst, but the blind automation was not yet opening fire. The security system was waiting, assessing the threat level of the motionless human. "Nika, respond to the airlock," the voice of Gleb, the chief mechanic of her crew, cut through the interference with openly hysterical notes. "We have a red alert across the entire sector. The central mains are going haywire. Humidity is dropping to 0. Internal pressure is jumping all over the place. The locals are in a panic. They're just trampling each other at the transit hubs. We've initiated the emergency undocking protocol. Drop your stupid trial and run for the shuttle. You have exactly 3 minutes." Nika swallowed. Her dry, moisture-deprived throat immediately responded with a searing pain. She still stood absolutely motionless, not daring to even lower her gaze. She physically felt how the 4 security turrets under the stone ceiling tracked the millimeter fluctuations of her chest with every heavy breath. On the floor, by her heavy work boots, lay the 3 aquatic judges, whose condition had already crossed the critical line. "I can't run, Gleb," she said in a steady voice, knowing the radio's highly sensitive microphone would catch the words. "The steel doors are welded shut. I have 4 targeting lasers on me. They'll burn right through me the first sharp move I make. 3 local authorities are turning to dust on the floor right now because of a vent malfunction. I need you to tap into the internal circuit's local network and remotely flush the security system cache. Cut their power for just 10 seconds so I can move from this spot." A heavy, dense silence hung in the air, filled only by the menacing hum of the magnetic coils in the compartment walls. "Nika, have you lost your damn mind?" Her partner's voice broke into a hoarse rasp. The terminal keys on his side clattered desperately, punching through the static. "I just pulled the logs for your access level. You're flagged in the main database as an active accomplice to first-degree sabotage. The automatics found our titanium relays and diagnostic shunt in your sector, the very ones that mysteriously disappeared from the ship last week. The local cops are already blocking the docking arms." "It's a long story. I didn't steal them. I'll explain everything." Nika tried to draw air through her nose, but the freeze-dried oxygen only seared her mucous membranes. "Just flush the turret cache." "No!" Gleb cut her off sharply. "If I try to hack the aliens' combat circuit now to pull out an officially recognized terrorist, the station defense network will immediately flag our shuttle as a hostile target. They'll burn us right on the tether, not even giving us a chance to fire up the main engines. I will not sacrifice the ship and the whole crew for your legal troubles." Nika bit her cracked lip until it hurt, tasting a distinct salty tang on her tongue. The crew was openly scared. Deep inside a gutted industrial asteroid, where the rules of survival were right now dictated by blind automation and a panicking crowd, the human fear of death worked primitively and reliably. The crew simply wanted to live. And to save their own lives, they were ready to cut the problematic cargo loose right now. "Save your own neck, Nika," the mechanic said harshly, with clear tension in his voice. "We're sealing the airlock in 60 seconds. If you're not in the transfer chamber, we're leaving without you." The unnaturally dry air tightened the skin on her face, turning it into brittle parchment. Nika slowly shifted her eyes downward, trying not to move her chin. The alien judges were no longer trying to crawl away from the humming floor vent. They just lay limp on the corrugated metal, their wide gill slits stuck together for good. Against the opposite wall hung Valian. His wrists had been mercilessly cinched by metal bands into deep furrows, his joints crushed by the power coils, but the large alien was still conscious. The pressure of escaping time and alien fear had reached that precise boundary where Nika stopped filtering her words. In moments like these, her internal brakes always failed, giving way to a stupid, venomous defensive reflex. "You know, Chief Mechanic," she rasped into the radio mic, "if you scratch the paint on the outer hull in your panic during departure, I will personally deduct the repair costs from your pay. And leave my spare toolkit alone. You don't know how to use it anyway." "You're insane," the speaker spat back viciously. "Contract terminated. End of transmission." The airlock channel emitted a short technical beep and disconnected for good. For several long seconds, Nika stood in deafening isolation, listening only to the howl of the pumps, extracting the last moisture from the room. And then the stone floor beneath her soles vibrated with a fine, rhythmic tremor. A deep, low-frequency hum rolled through all the asteroid's bulkheads, resonating in her bones. It was the unmistakable sound of heavy, explosive bolts firing. Her crew had just detached the transport shuttle and abandoned the mining station, leaving her alone in a locked steel box with zero chance of evacuation. Her own ship was gone. The contract money was forfeit. 4 red combat laser beams still trembled on her chest, and 3 living beings beside her were minutes away from irreversible physiological collapse. A wet, grinding sound came from the side. Valian moved again, desperately. The accused completely ignored his broken bones and the pain tearing at his tendons. He twisted his massive, iron-bound neck with great effort, and his dark, pupilless eyes met Nika's tense gaze. Certain that the human had finally noticed him, the alien jerked his shackled, bleeding hands with tremendous strain. This was no longer a panicked attempt to break free of the force restraints. It was a very specific, insistent gesture. He was stubbornly pointing his hands directly at the metal grating of the floor vent, the very spot where the cloud of scattered Spice Canister contents had been sucked in minutes ago, and near which the stolen shuttle parts now lay discarded. Valian opened his maw wide, and, overriding the turbine noise, let out a short, attention-demanding roar. He was not begging for mercy, nor trying to justify himself to the judges. He was waiting for concrete action from the only human left in the compartment. The 4 crimson dots of the laser sights quivered in sync on the fabric of Nika's work jacket. Their microscopic movements matched the rapid, ragged rhythm of her pulse exactly. The security automatics of the round tech bay had switched to active standby, primed to incinerate the target at the slightest acoustic spike or sudden jerk. The air in the sealed compartment had become so flash-frozen that each new breath seared the larynx, leaving a distinct aftertaste of metallic dust on the tongue. But Valian completely ignored the weapons trained on the human. Shackled in magnetic shackles, his joints shattered, the accused alien kept growling lowly. He twisted his massive neck with great effort and stubbornly pointed his bleeding hands at the metal floor grating, at the spot where the stolen shuttle parts glinted dully among the scattered spices. The 3 aquatic judges on the floor no longer made a sound. Their moist, silvery skin was covered in deep, pale cracks, and their wide gill slits had fused into solid, inflamed scars. Nika had no time left for cautious decisions. Her link to the crew was severed forever. The rescue transport had left the station, leaving her alone with the looming catastrophe. She forced herself to make the first exhale, trying to push the air out through her teeth as evenly as possible. The turrets under the ceiling whirred almost inaudibly with their servos, adjusting the angles of attack. The automatics reacted to sharp changes in rhythm and volume spikes. To survive, she had to become part of the monotonous machine noise. Nika waited until the climate unit's compressor, deep beneath the metal deck, let out a long, heavy thump as it pumped another portion of moisture from the room. Under this low, vibrating hum, she smoothly shifted her right foot by 1 centimeter. The red beams grazed her collarbone, but no salvo followed. The hum repeated. She slowly shifted her weight, lowering her shoulders, step by step, masking the scrape of her heavy boots with the rhythm of the working drill turbines. Nika slid down the smooth stone wall and crouched right in front of the floor vent grate. The targeting dots froze on her forehead. She carefully reached out her hand toward the broken plastic tool container. Her fingers found a handful of scattered red pepper, mixed with yellow pollen and dried garlic. Under any other circumstances, this would have looked like a bad joke. An ordinary, primitive Earth smuggler's method for finding invisible drafts in old cargo holds. Nika scooped up the pungent mixture, rubbed it between her palms, and, choosing the moment when the straining howl of the exhaust reached its peak, tossed the colored dust into the air above the metal grate. The acrid cloud of spices did not settle on the floor. It didn't even disperse evenly across the room, as it should have with the filters working normally. Instead, the red suspension jerked sharply to the side and was sucked with unnatural speed into a narrow, barely visible gap between the thick docking plate and the main duct. Nika squinted, ignoring the stinging pain in her eyes from the pepper dust. The draft in this crevice was monstrous. This wasn't a software glitch or a climate control error. Somewhere there, behind the layer of heavy metal, a hidden emergency valve had blown, one that the station's automatics knew nothing about. The security systems simply could not see this mechanical breach, continuing to dutifully dry out the sealed compartment to compensate for the uncontrolled loss of pressure. The invisible hole was sucking the atmosphere out of the deadlock. She lowered her gaze. At the very edge of the ventilation grate, where they had been thrown after the bag fell, lay 2 heavy titanium relays and a complex diagnostic shunt. The very navigation panel components from a light-tonnage shuttle, the ones that had officially branded her an accomplice in preparing an act of sabotage. Nika looked at Valian. The large alien was breathing heavily and intermittently, his chin glistening with dark, thick blood. But his dark eyes followed her movements unblinkingly. Then she looked back at the shuttle parts and at the dark gap by the docking plate. The dimensions matched down to the millimeter. The realization hit her with such force that Nika nearly lost control of her breathing rhythm, risking a volley from the lasers. Valian was not the saboteur. He hadn't been planning to blow up the main line or sell the stolen equipment on the local markets. With his unique hearing, or the fine tactile sensitivity of an aquatic species, he had long ago detected this breach, blind to the automatics. And every shift, he had secretly brought from her shuttle exactly those industrial components that perfectly matched the size and alloy density required. He had been trying to prevent a catastrophe, trying to physically plug a hole that the flawless, high-tech sensors could not register. But her ship no longer existed within reach. The repair crew had torn up the contract and left. These 3 metal blocks remained her only assets, her ticket back into the profession, her only chance to ever repair her own transport's navigation and return to honest work. Without them, she became a nobody in this sector. The howl of the exhaust shifted into an unbearably piercing shriek. The Chief Justice on the floor let out a dry, grating wheeze. His lungs had begun to collapse irreversibly. Nika clenched her teeth, unfastened the tight flap of her tool pouch, and pulled out a heavy wrench. 4 laser beams instantly converged on the dull metal of the tool in her hand. She ignored them. Grabbing the first titanium relay, she pressed it against the gap. The part wouldn't fit because of the protruding contact pads. Nika swung and struck the expensive port hard with the wrench. The fragile, high-precision internals crunched pitifully. She struck again, ruthlessly deforming the titanium casing, turning a complex electronic assembly into a crude, primitive wedge. She hammered the mangled relay into the crack. The air shrieked furiously along the edges, resisting the obstruction. Nika grabbed the diagnostic shunt, an item worth more than a line technician's annual salary. Several precise, heavy blows destroyed its geometry, flattening the thin edges. She drove it in next, pounding metal into metal, scraping the skin off her knuckles bloody against the corrugated grating to the accompaniment of howling turbines. Her own escape routes were being ground to dust with every strike. Navigation nodes were turning into worthless compressed junk, but along with it, the strained whistle of the invisible draft began to change pitch, growing quieter and quieter. She took the last relay, crushed its gleaming casing with several furious blows, and forced it tightly into the remaining gap. Smearing blood from her battered hands across the gray deck metal, she threw her full weight onto the wrench, using it as a lever, and drove the titanium plug home to the very limit. The whistle cut off completely. The compartment instantly filled with a strange, heavy silence, broken only by the distant, steady hum of the drilling machines. The furious leak had stopped. The blinded automation ceased registering the anomalous pressure drop through the torn valve, and the climate control compressors noticeably slowed their cycles, halting the extreme moisture extraction. Nika tossed the bent wrench aside, sagging heavily onto the corrugated floor. She wiped the acrid sweat from her forehead with a dirty sleeve. Her chest heaved from the strain, but the crimson targeting dots no longer tried to track her movements. The security system, no longer receiving contradictory threat markers from the damaged mains, switched the turrets to standby mode. The beams flickered briefly and died. She took a deep breath. The oxygen was still dry and dead, but it was no longer leaving the sealed round tech bay. However, this fragile equilibrium lasted only a few seconds. A sharp, wet thud of a heavy body hitting the wall sounded behind her. Nika spun around sharply, instinctively pressing her back against the grating. The three aquatic judges, whose organisms had just passed the critical threshold of oxygen and water starvation, could not cope with the consequences of the sudden environmental shift. The halt of the exhaust and the microscopic pressure rebound sent them into severe physiological shock. Their survival instincts, previously completely suppressed by suffocation, suddenly flared with uncontrollable animal force. The Chief Justice spasmed with his whole body, his wide, webbed hands scrabbling chaotically against the metal. He let out a piercing, gurgling screech and began to blindly thrash around the technical zone, crashing heavily into the steel bulkheads. The two other judges instantly followed his lead, their bodies convulsed in the rigid seizures of primal panic. They did not understand that the lethal leak had been sealed. Their inflamed, dehydrated brains demanded immediate escape from the trap. One of the judges backhanded the wall, his large body ricocheting sideways and slamming with a deafening crash into the magnetic coils holding Valian. The accused let out a muffled howl as the vibration from the impact shot straight through his bound, fractured joints. The second judge, leaving dark, wet streaks of torn skin on the floor, lunged straight toward the floor vent, toward the freshly driven titanium plugs. Nika realized that in a state of blind shock, these massive creatures were about to trample her work right now. They would inevitably knock out the driven wedges, and the powerful draft would return, finishing off everyone in the sealed room once and for all. The animal terror of those she had sacrificed everything to save turned out to be far more dangerous than the accident itself. The panicked bulk of a judge, weighing over 1.5 metric tons, was barreling straight for the floor vent, elbows thrust forward and claws tearing at the metal deck. If this living battering ram hit the joint now, the hastily hammered-in titanium plugs would shoot back out into the corridor like corks from a bottle. Nika had no time to think about shattered bones or torn-off nails. She simply dropped sideways onto the corrugated steel, completely blocking access to the mangled navigation panel parts and Valian's shackled body with her own. A heavy blow landed right on her shoulder, knocking the last of the dry air from her lungs. The judge, blinded by fear and lack of moisture, did not even realize what he had tripped over. His slimy thigh, now crusting over with a whitish film, slumped down on top of her, pinning Nika to the grate. The human's fingers instinctively clawed into the edges of the floor hatch, holding her position. From the side, wheezing and coughing up ichor, the second alien was already crawling closer, his webbed hands chaotically searching for any support in the emptied compartment. The physical strength of a single Earthwoman, even one used to hauling heavy cargo, was catastrophically insufficient against 3 convulsing amphibians. The room was turning into a mass grave, where the rescued were about to trample their rescuer. Their auditory receptors, finely tuned to pick up the internal noises of another organism, were now overloaded by their own panic. To pull the judges out of this stupor, a powerful, alien acoustic shock was needed. Nika flipped onto her back, bracing her knees against the chest of the Chief Justice who had collapsed on her, and screamed so loud her own ultrasound rang in her ears. "Get the hell off me, you dried-up sardines!" Her cry broke into a hoarse, barking falsetto, echoing off the stone walls of the deadlock. "Back, I said! Get your bellies on the deck before I turn you all into sushi!" The sharp, deafening spike in volume, mixed with the absolutely chaotic, brazen, and broken rhythm of human speech, worked like an electric shock. The Chief Justice froze, his enormous black eyes, without any whites, twitching convulsively as he tried to focus on Nika's face. The 2 other aliens, their claws already poised over the vent, also froze in absurd, twisted postures. Their biometric perception system, accustomed to calculating hidden lies through subtle diaphragm spasms, simply drowned in this wave of open, absurd human insolence. The human beneath them was not trying to attack, felt no hidden fear, and was not attempting to bend them to her will. This biological pump was simply spewing tons of incomprehensible toxic noise with the intonations of a bazaar merchant. Nika did not give them a single second to recover. Her defense mechanism, triggered by the pressure, kicked in at full capacity, delivering fresh batches of commands mixed with vulgar swearing. "What are you staring at, you half-baked ichthyanders?" she rasped, grabbing the Chief Justice by his slick wrist and yanking him downward with force, closer to the floor. "Forgotten how to breathe? Let me remind you. Get your hands up, now. Hold this, genius. Hold this sheet, or we're all about to turn into sun-dried roach." Taking advantage of the giant's momentary disorientation, she literally dragged them along with her. Throwing her whole body against the second judge's shoulder, Nika forced him to shift his center of gravity. Her fingers jabbed sharply into the alien's webbed palm, pointing at the trembling titanium plug from which air was still weakly seeping out. The aliens did not understand the words, but they read the physical direction of force and the rough, unyielding confidence of human hands perfectly. The Chief Justice was the first to seize the initiative. His trained mind, just wrenched from the grip of suffocation, recognized in Nika's actions the only working logic of survival. He turned heavily, braced his massive knees against the grooved metal of the deck, and covered the mangled shuttle relay with both of his broad palms, throwing his entire weight on top of it. The metal beneath his fingers stopped vibrating. A second later, the second tribunal member settled in beside him, pressing his shoulder rigidly against the warped navigation panel, wedging it into the docking gap. The animal, destructive energy of panic transformed in a split second into a heavy, coordinated physical effort. 3 enormous aquatic beings and 1 human smuggler formed a living ring around the floor vent, literally crushing the scrap metal into the stone base of the asteroid. The joint bracing of the damaged structures worked. The last microscopic gap between the plates sealed shut, finally closing off the emergency channel. The air in the compartment rapidly thickened, returning to normal density parameters. The climate control sensors, no longer detecting an uncontrolled loss of pressure, emitted a long, soothing technical signal. The grating, maddening howl of the compressors beneath the deck began to fade smoothly, settling into the steady, familiar hum of standard ventilation. The system stabilized. A heavy, exhausting silence hung in the sealed round tech bay, broken only by the ragged, wheezing breath of 4 living beings. Nika sat crouched, her forehead pressed against the cold gray bulkhead. Her fingers on her battered hands trembled faintly, leaving red smears on the metal. Beside her, the 3 aquatic judges sat, their matte, dried-out flanks heaving heavily. Their broad gill slits began to open slowly, in synchronization, absorbing the stabilized, if dry, oxygen. They no longer tried to flee, nor did they look at the human as a threat. In their huge, dark eyes, there was a deep, devastating understanding of the price this alien woman had just paid for their lives by destroying her own equipment. On the opposite wall, Valian dropped his head weakly onto his chest, his massive shoulders finally relaxing inside the magnetic shackles. The station was saved, the pressure had normalized, but the heavy sealed door of the round tech bay remained shut, cutting them off from the rest of the world. The time had come to take stock and decide what to do with those who had broken every rule for the sake of everyone's salvation. The four massive steel plates that served as the sealed doors of the round tech bay crawled apart with a heavy industrial clang. Harsh white light from the corridor struck their eyes, cutting through the gloom of the technical zone. Along with the bright illumination, the roar of the disturbed transit hub and the thunder of heavy boots on grooved metal burst inside. An armed patrol of guards stormed into the room. Their scanners were still operating on the old, uncancelled security protocol. 3 short clicks of safeties being disengaged sounded, and the red beams of laser sights confidently settled on Nika's work jacket once more. To the automatics and the station police, she was still an active accomplice to sabotage. The Chief Justice reacted instantly. Planting his webbed feet wide, the enormous silvery creature tore himself off the floor with visible effort. His skin was still dry and matte after the leak that had nearly killed them, but he stepped directly into the line of fire, completely shielding the human with his massive back. The alien let out a sharp, wet whistle, accompanied by a harsh, chopping gesture of his hand. It was a direct order from the highest-ranking official, backed by his personal authority, which in the station's hierarchy stood above any algorithm. The guards exchanged uncertain glances and slowly lowered their barrels. The round tech bay security system reluctantly accepted the priority override. The magnetic coils in the monolithic wall emitted a fading electronic groan. The metal bracelets rotated on their threads with a loud click and opened, releasing Valian's shattered wrists. The large alien collapsed heavily to his knees, unable to support himself on his crushed joints, but almost immediately raised his head stubbornly. The Chief Justice slowly turned toward him. The broad gills on the elder's neck pulsed steadily in the recovering air as he carefully examined the mangled titanium plugs jammed into the ventilation. The picture had finally assembled itself into an unassailable logical chain. Valian had never planned to sabotage the central transit line, nor had he intended to sell shuttle equipment on the black market. Using a unique auditory sense inaccessible to technology, he had long ago detected a mechanical breach hidden behind a docking plate, invisible to sensors and poised to drain the atmosphere from the entire sector. He had been stealing parts, shift after shift, precisely because their dimensions and the density of their refractory alloy perfectly matched the shape of the hidden puncture. He was trying to prevent a catastrophe. All the damning charges of sabotage collapsed right there, on the filthy floor beside the plugged floor vent. A repair crew in thick yellow hazmat suits pushed their way efficiently into the round tech bay. They unceremoniously shouldered the guards aside and headed straight for the source of the recent leak, flooding the mangled metal with the beams of their bright industrial flashlights. Nika stood silently against the wall, wiping fresh blood from her battered knuckles with a dirty sleeve. In the harsh glow of the work lights, her former possessions looked utterly pathetic. 2 expensive titanium relays and a sophisticated diagnostic shunt, flattened by frantic blows from a wrench, were now wedged tight into the breach. That had been her only ticket home. The crew had voided her contract. The shuttle had departed the asteroid without a navigation control circuit, and she could not afford a single credit for replacement units. She was officially stranded as a pauper in deep space, stuck on a foreign mining station with nothing but a backpack full of tools. The crushing weight of this new reality settled onto her shoulders, and an old defense reflex immediately kicked in, demanding she mask the weakness somehow. If you're planning to dig that out for scrap, just a heads up, it's pure, high-grade titanium, Nika said hoarsely, forcing a crooked smirk onto her face. Worth a couple of decent dinners down in the transit hub. Dibs on a share, that's still my junk, after all. The joke fell completely flat, sounding pathetic and out of place. In that same instant, the rhythm of her breathing predictably faltered. Her pulse spiked sharply, and her tense diaphragm betrayed her with a microspasm. The 3 aquatic judges turned their massive heads toward her in perfect sync, their black eyes fixating unblinkingly on the human's chest. Their sensitive auditory apparatus instantly detected the classic physiological signature of deception again. But this time, they understood the context of what had happened. For the first time, the alien's biometric sensors decoded a human peculiarity correctly. Behind this stupid, aggressive bravado and the ragged breathing pattern was no attempt to cheat justice or prepare an ambush. It concealed nothing more than a desperate awareness of a total dead end and a complete financial catastrophe. The aliens could physically hear the fear of being left here alone, and they could see how stubbornly she was masking it with awkward laughter. None of the 3 tribunal members made a sound. They simply registered the fact as a new variable in their assessment of the human species. Nika let out a heavy sigh, pushed herself away from the cold gray bulkhead, and squatted down to gather her scattered belongings. She shoved the heavy, bent adjustable wrench, a roll of engineering tape, and a few intact circuit fuses into her dense tool pouch. The plastic spice canister, broken into 2 pieces, the same one she had recently used to disperse the contraband kitchen spices, still lay where it had fallen near the ventilation grate, covered in a layer of yellowish pollen and red pepper flakes. She simply looked at the dirty shards, realizing that this small piece of earthly comfort was no longer of any use to her. Snapping the pouch's flap shut, Nika turned and began walking slowly toward the exit, careful not to put weight on her bruised shoulder. Behind her back came a heavy, shuffling sound. Valian, forcing his way through the cutting pain in his mangled arms, moved awkwardly toward the floor vent. He bent down slowly and carefully picked up the cracked plastic. The large alien clutched the shards tightly in his bleeding fingers, pressing them to his broad chest. It was no longer random trash. For the acquitted being and the 3 aquatic judges, this broken box had become weighty, physical proof of a duty honestly performed, and an honest price paid for salvation. Nika stepped over the threshold of the round tech bay, merging into the noisy, bustling flow of the transit hub of a gutted industrial asteroid. She had no ship, no money left in her account, and absolutely no idea how to look for work with a reputation like this, and the heavy tool pouch pulled painfully at her side with every step.